the moment the Galactic Sciences Symposium convened aboard the neutral research vessel Ecliptica. Orbiting the gas giant Velari 6, tension buzzed beneath the polished chrome floors. Representatives from over 37 civilizations had gathered in the central auditorium, a domed chamber as vast as a Terran stadium, its walls glowing faint blue from the embedded data veins. The air shimmered with biofilters and ambient language conversion fields. At the center podium stood Professor Tarloon of the Velari Collegium, a being shaped like a walking constellation, its glowing filaments pulsing with anticipation. "I propose," Tarloon began, "a controlled meteor impact test to assess planetary defense systems across the Alliance." Gasps spread through the crowd. The Quarn diplomat spilled a cup of nutrient broth down its thorax. A Zerni ambassador fainted on the spot, its assistants catching it mid-swoon. However, one man sitting in the back, wearing a patched synthetic jacket and boots held together with what looked like fishing line, leaned forward and frowned. Kale Foster, Earth's sole registered representative that year, scratched his scruffy chin. "Wait. You want to throw rocks at us?" "Precisely," Tarloon answered, its filaments glowing bright green, the Velari equivalent of delight. Simulated meteoroids targeted at designated planetary surfaces. Controlled, of course. "We must rigorously test readiness." "We've only got one planet," Kale said, standing. "You miss by 5 degrees and we've got beachfront property in Kansas." Tarloon tilted its head slowly. "Then perhaps you would like to volunteer your species' ingenuity, construct a shield. We will provide the meteoroids. You may use what resources you can gather within the time limit." "How long?" 4 Velari cycles, equivalent to 12 Terran days. Kale looked around. No one else seemed eager. The Gorkathi were shaking their eye stalks. The Ladrani hissed at their assistants. Earth, being a relatively new member of the Alliance, wasn't expected to contribute much, but here was an opportunity. "Fine," Kale said. "We'll build your shield, but don't expect anything fancy." The Velari's lights turned a triumphant violet. "We expect only results." 12 days. Back aboard the human vessel Prospector Dawn, which was more salvage barge than ship, Kale paced the narrow corridors lined with crates of spare electronics, stripped hull plating, and half-fused solar panels. The ship's only other occupant, a retired engineering AI named LUXE, floated nearby in its spherical housing, blinking amber. "You accepted a meteor bombardment challenge?" LUXE asked. "Without consulting me. You're not even technically active duty anymore. I'm still the only one here with a functioning molecular printer." Kale yanked open a crate of hydraulic tubing, "and I'm the only one with fingers. We'll make do." The AI hovered, unamused. "Where do you intend to build this shield?" "Low orbit, around our assigned test sector. We'll anchor it to the remains of that mining ring around Velari's third moon. That thing's been abandoned for 40 years. "Exactly. No one using it means no one cares if we bolt junk to it." Kale got to work immediately. With LUXE calculating orbital trajectories and structural tolerances, Kale scavenged. He stripped the ship's auxiliary solar arrays, repurposed defunct heat shielding from the cargo hold, and even repurposed a broken grav drum into a kinetic dispersal node. Every hour was accounted for. Meals were reduced to protein paste and synthetic water. Sleep came in 90-minute bursts, jolted by alarms or sudden decompression leaks. At hour 83, Kale sliced open his palm on a jagged metal sheet. Blood spattered across a pressure gauge. LUXE beeped. "You need medical attention." "Already patched it," Kale said, wrapping it tight with gauze. "We're behind on the stabilizers. You're shaking. Adrenaline. You're dripping on the control panel." Kale paused. His knees buckled slightly. He sat down hard on a crate. "Fine." 15 minutes. LUXE ran a scan. "No infection yet, but you'll be useless if this keeps up." "Then keep me useful." Despite the mounting injuries and exhaustion, the structure began to take shape. A wide, hexagonal lattice, anchored to the mining ring's central hub, embedded with rotating panels angled to deflect or absorb impact. The shield had no elegance, no symmetry. It looked like a child's craft project if the child had access to a plasma torch and a worsening caffeine addiction. On the 11th day, a Velari scout drone arrived to inspect progress. It hovered silently as Kale adjusted the final support strut, then transmitted a single message: compliance satisfactory. Prepare for impact. Back on the ecliptica, the assembly of alien observers gathered to watch the test. Tarloon presided, glowing with academic glee. Our meteoroids are composed of synthetic alloy cores with thermal coatings to simulate real atmospheric entry. Mass ranges from 60 to 200 kilograms. Velocity, 22 kilometers per second, the audience murmured. Kale, now aboard the prospector Dawn once more, floated in front of the control panel, bruised, bandaged, and wired on concentrated stimulants. LUXE had installed a remote monitor of the shield's telemetry and structural response. 14 seconds to impact, LUXE said. Okay, Kale whispered. Let's see if this disaster flies. The first cluster of meteoroids hit, the shield vibrated violently, dust and debris scattered into space. One of the outer panels bent but held. The kinetic dispersal nodes spun into action, redirecting the force across the lattice. A second wave struck harder. This time, 2 panels detached, spinning off into the void. Kale gripped the console. Give me panel integrity. 72%. We are within survivability margins. Keep it stable. The third wave came with no warning, a deliberate curveball from the Velari. A cluster of meteoroids struck the lower quadrant where the shield had the least reinforcement. The structure groaned. Kale's console sparked. LUXE, we've lost 2 supports. I'm rerouting load distribution. Do it fast. A support beam snapped, ricocheting into the mining ring. One of the stabilizing arms twisted. Kale watched the telemetry drop below 50%. He opened a comm to the shield's remote thrusters and began manual override. You're going to expose yourself to the debris field, LUXE warned. No choice. Kale suited up and launched from the airlock in a tethered pod. He maneuvered through the floating wreckage and reached the drifting stabilizer. A shard of metal struck his leg. He yelped, spinning. Blood clouded the inside of his suit. He hissed, gritted his teeth, and clamped a seal over the breach. He reached the stabilizer and used a magnetic harness to latch on. With shaking hands, he reconnected the thruster line and triggered a course correction. The shield groaned again but stabilized. Back on the ecliptica, Tarloon observed silently. The final wave struck. The shield flexed, bent, and fractured but did not collapse. Debris scattered harmlessly into space. Kale drifted in his pod, panting, leg throbbing. LUXE, status, shield integrity at 21%. Meteor threat neutralized. A moment of silence. Then the comms lit up. Dozens of alien channels opened, voices overlapping in disbelief, amazement, and even grudging respect. Tarloon's voice cut through. Earth's defense simulation, successful? Kale slumped in the pod as medical alerts blared from his suit. Request, pick up. You're bleeding internally, LUXE said. You need surgery. Add it to the list. Also, your femur may be fractured, I noticed. Within hours, a neutral medical shuttle collected Kale and brought him to the Ecliptica's infirmary. The Velari medical team, unfamiliar with human physiology, deferred to the on-board medics from the Relax species, who had once performed surgery on a Terran ambassador. Kale was diagnosed with a compound fracture in his right femur, 2 cracked ribs, and severe lacerations. He underwent emergency surgery and was placed in a pressurized recovery pod. He remained unconscious for nearly 17 hours. When he woke, he found himself staring at the ceiling of the medbay, a dull pain radiating from his leg. He couldn't move. A nurse with pale, translucent skin, a Lidrani, noticed and called for a physician. You are stable, the doctor said. You will require a minimum of 6 weeks for bone healing. Physical therapy will follow. Kale blinked. Did we win? The doctor nodded. Your shield performed beyond projections, Kale exhaled slowly. Good. As he drifted back into sleep, the last thing he heard was Luxe's voice over the comm. Remind me to never let you volunteer again. The first thing Kale noticed when he woke again was the smell sterilized air laced faintly with lavender and something metallic. The room pulsed gently with light from overhead panels, shifting in tone every few seconds like a breath. His left leg was encased in a translucent cast, and a narrow intravenous line snaked from his arm to a small, square device that blinked green beside the bed. Good. You're awake. You've missed 2 meals and a delegation visit, said a voice from the far corner. Kale turned his head too quickly and regretted it instantly. A dull throb pulsed behind his right eye. Sitting by the wall, barely fitting on the too small observation bench, was something shaped like a pile of vines attempting to impersonate royalty. It wore a sash of woven copper and blinked its many eyes at him with what might have been concern or indigestion. Didn't realize we had visitors, Kale muttered, his throat dry, the vine being stood, its limbs unfolding with unsettling grace. I am Wrenth of the Drawl Coalition. I came to observe the recovery process of the human specimen. I'm not a specimen, on the contrary. You are currently the most discussed biological anomaly in the Alliance's medical forums. Kale tried to sit up. That doesn't sound encouraging. You withstood a projectile trauma event, remained conscious during orbital maneuvering, and performed a mechanical override while in hemorrhagic shock. Several species submitted formal complaints accusing you of biological dishonesty. Sorry to disappoint. Your apology is unnecessary. The Drawl consider deceit by survival a mark of honor. Kale coughed and winced. Well, I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just trying not to die. The Drawl's vines twitched. Which is, as I understand, one of your species' primary motivators. The door hissed open. In floated Luxe, now mounted on a telescoping frame that allowed it to walk awkwardly on 3 stubby legs. Visiting hours are not over, but the patient requires nutrient intake. Wrenth bowed slightly. Then I shall observe from a respectful distance. I'd rather you didn't, Kale said, reaching for the tray Luxe extended. It contained a protein slab the color of wet concrete, a cup of something steaming and orange, and 2 pills that looked like they could dissolve a bolt. I adjusted the taste matrix, Luxe said. You will detect notes of citrus, nutmeg, and disappointment. Kale chewed carefully. Still better than Alliance cafeteria food. A silence settled, filled only by the faint hum of filtration systems and the occasional beep from the monitor near his leg. Then Wrenth spoke again. There will be a commendation ceremony, it said. You are to be awarded the Resilience Sigil of Sector 32. I don't need a medal. It's not optional. Kale sighed and focused on the orange liquid. Of course it's not. Additionally, Wrenth continued, the Velari have convened a follow-up panel. There is debate regarding the shield's implications for future planetary defenses. Some argue that your methods introduce a disruptive precedent. I used garbage and elbow grease. How's that disruptive? You succeeded. Kale leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Is that really the problem? Yes. 2 days passed before he was allowed out of bed. The medics, 1 relax, 2 from a species that resembled ambulatory stingrays, hovered constantly. They adjusted his cast, checked his muscle density, and scanned his bone regrowth every 4 hours. The human body, it turned out, healed in ways the Alliance still didn't fully understand, especially under their treatments. The cast was laced with microstimulators that sent faint pulses into the fracture site. It itched constantly. By the 5th day, he could limp along the corridor using a wheeled support frame shaped like half a ladder. Luxe followed closely, its frame clicking softly with each step. You are not cleared for extended movement, it warned. I'm not cleared to miss this meeting either. You're not officially required to attend. I'm going anyway. The meeting chamber was smaller than the auditorium, with a long, curved table and layered seating around it like an amphitheater. Over a dozen species were already seated when Kale arrived. He recognized a few mostly by the number of eyes or the way they blinked asynchronously. Tarloon was there, standing near the central display. Its filaments dimmed briefly as Kale entered, though whether that was surprise or disdain was impossible to tell. "You should be in recovery," Tarloon said. "I got bored. The cost of that boredom may be further injury." Kale eased into a chair with a grimace. "Add it to the tab." A spherical drone descended from the ceiling and activated the holographic display. The image of the shield appeared, rotating slowly, with impact vectors and stress diagrams flickering along its surface. "The test results," Tarloon began, "indicate an anomalous resilience threshold. The structure, despite lacking uniform material quality, demonstrated containment efficacy exceeding Alliance-grade prototype systems." A being composed entirely of shimmering mist raised a limb. "Are you suggesting we abandon our current research in favor of scavenger design?" "No," Tarloon replied, "but the methodology warrants examination." Another delegate, this one cloaked in iridescent feathers, leaned forward. "Was there intent behind the asymmetry?" Kale cleared his throat. "Sort of. I worked with what I had, balanced it the best I could with mass distribution. The asymmetry actually helped redirect the force vectors away from the central anchor." There was a pause. Several delegates turned to one another, muttering in low, reverberant tones. "And you determined this without computational modeling?" asked the feathered one. "I had some help from my ship's AI." Lux E, standing beside the door, let out an indignant chirp. "And I was not consulted about this meeting either." Tarloon gestured toward the display. "Regardless, the implication is clear. Human improvisational engineering may offer viable alternatives to standardized systems, particularly in low-resource environments." A delegate composed of interlocking stone plates grumbled. "That is not engineering." "That is desperation turned into architecture," Kale shrugged. "Tell that to the shield still floating in orbit." The room quieted. Tarloon's filaments pulsed a deep blue, which is why the Velari Collegium proposes a joint initiative. A field program in which participating civilizations attempt to replicate the human approach under similar constraints. Kale blinked. "Wait, you want others to build like we did?" "Precisely, under supervision. Using only what can be gathered from derelict orbitals and decommissioned facilities." A delegate bristled. "You mean trash." "I mean salvage," Tarloon corrected. "There is a distinction." Kale leaned over to Luxe. "This is going to get weird." It already has. The proposal was passed barely, and Tarloon announced the initiative would begin within the month. Participating entities would select teams and be assigned orbital zones where they would scavenge and construct under time pressure. They called it the Adaptive Engineering Challenge. Kale called it cosmic dumpster diving. Back in the medical wing, later that evening, Kale sat by the port window, watching the distant glint of the shield still orbiting above Vierland's third moon. His leg ached, but he could finally bend it without swearing. Luxe hovered nearby, processing field reports. "You understand this means you've started a galactic competition centered on improvisation," it said. "They'll hate it. They'll also learn from it." Kale nodded slowly. "Maybe that's the point." Outside, the stars shifted slightly as the station rotated. Far beyond, a new wave of ships was arriving. Not warships, not science vessels, refit craft, cargo haulers, and civilian rigs, each one ready to test themselves against what the humans had survived by instinct. Kale leaned back, bones still knitting, and smiled for the first time in days. Let the games begin. 2 weeks after the shield test, Kale stood upright for the first time without assistance. His leg ached, but the cast had been replaced with a flexible brace, and the stingray-like medics finally agreed he wouldn't collapse in the middle of a corridor. He moved slowly, not limping so much as calculating each step like a cautious mountaineer. He entered the auxiliary hangar bay where the Adaptive Engineering Challenge teams had begun assembling. The space had been cleared of its usual cargo modules, replaced by temporary workstations, plasma welders, and bins of unsorted scrap. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something that might have once been lubricant. LUXE trailed a meter behind, projecting a quiet hum that kept away curious onlookers. The AI had taken to wearing a small flag on its frame, a stitched patch of Earth's blue and green design, though slightly crooked. Kale stopped near a table where a set of crystalline tools hovered in a containment field. A team of 3 delegates from the Velari Compact was attempting to shape a stabilizer fin from a repurposed hull plate. One of them, a silver-scaled technician with 4 elbows, glanced up. "You are the improviser?" "Engineer," Kale corrected. "Improviser makes it sound like I tripped and fell into a solution." The technician held up the curved metal piece. "This design lacks symmetry. Is that intentional? Depends. Are you building for balance or deflection? We calculated even distribution across all axes. Try loading the mass asymmetrically. Your system might hold better under rotational stress." The Velari blinked in confusion. Kale reached for a stylus and sketched a quick diagram on a nearby console. The technicians studied it and then nodded, turning back to confer with their team. Kale moved on. Every few meters, another group was trying something different. The Krenvathi were compressing salvaged insulation foam into shock absorbers. A delegation from the Arun cluster had torn down an abandoned satellite and attempted to reconfigure its engine mounts into anchor struts. Most of the work was crude, held together with rapid bond sealant and optimism. A vibration ran through the floor as an old cargo pod was dropped into the bay. The vessel bore the markings of a decommissioned mining freighter. A team of drawl technicians, vines coiled with precision, immediately began stripping its outer panels. "They're taking this seriously," LUXE said. "They have something to prove. They also believe you cheated." Kale stopped. "How?" "By surviving." He rubbed his temple. "Great, so now I'm a benchmark and a scandal. Congratulations." The station's internal clock dimmed the bay lights slightly to indicate cycle shift. Most species didn't sleep the way humans did, but the break gave Kale a chance to return to the prospector Dawn and check the telemetry from the shield. It was still intact, holding a stable orbit, though one corner was starting to drift out of alignment. Inside the ship, the air was cooler, the hum of the reactor more comforting than the sterile quiet of the station. Kale lowered himself into the pilot's seat and flexed his leg carefully. "Sensor array still picking up debris fields from the test," LUXE said, linking to the console. "One of the Velari drones malfunctioned. They want assistance retrieving it. Tell them I'm off duty." "You're never off duty." A soft chime echoed through the cabin, a message request from the symposium's logistics board. Kale rolled his eyes and opened the channel. "You are invited to observe final evaluations of the Adaptive Engineering Challenge. Attendance is encouraged." Of course it is. The evaluation took place 3 days later in the open orbit around Vireland's second moon. 8 teams had completed their prototypes. Each structure was to be remotely tested with a controlled kinetic impact smaller than the original Meteor analogs, but fast enough to test structural response. Kale watched from a small observation vessel, seated beside a delegate from the Minari Collective, whose body resembled a hovering prism of refracted light. The Minari said nothing, but occasionally pulsed a faint purple when particularly impressed. The first test began. The Velari structure absorbed the impact but sheared its outer layer, spinning wildly before stabilizing. The Krenvathi's foam-based design compressed as intended, but the support beams buckled and snapped. One prototype, built by a coalition of insectoid engineers, disintegrated entirely on contact. Another exploded without being hit at all. Kale winced. That one was ambitious. The Minari pulsed blue, then came the drawl. Their shield, built in a staggered spiral formation, took the impact and twisted but didn't break. Instead, it flexed and reshaped slightly, spreading the force across its entire surface. Kale leaned forward. That wasn't in the schematics. They adapted, LUXE said, mid-construction. They altered the central support axis to allow torsion. Not bad. As the tests concluded, the Velari moderator reappeared on the central display. Analysis complete. One structure met all criteria without structural failure. The spiral design of the drawl rotated into view. Commendation awarded to the Drawl Coalition. Secondary recognition to Velari compact for lateral innovation. Kale leaned back. So we're not special anymore. You were never special, LUXE replied. Just early. The observation ship returned to the station, and the symposium concluded the next day. By then, the hangar had emptied, the temporary labs dismantled, the tools returned to their owners or left behind. Kale stood alone by the bay doors, watching the last cargo sled drift out into space. Renth approached, vines wrapped in a new copper sash. You will return to Earth, eventually. You are aware the Drawl intend to adapt their design for atmospheric purposes. Good. It should work better down there. Renth was quiet for a moment. You altered how many of us think about failure. That will cause discomfort. It's only failure if you don't learn from it. The Drawl nodded. We will remember that. Back aboard the prospector Dawn, Kale settled into his bunk. The brace on his leg made it difficult to get comfortable, but he managed. LUXE dimmed the lights and engaged the shielding protocols. You did not attend the medal ceremony. I've got enough metal in my leg. You also declined 3 interviews. I don't like cameras. There was a pause. They're calling your shield the Foster Arc, Kale groaned. That's terrible. It's already being added to the Alliance engineering curriculum. He lay still for a moment, the hum of the ship a steady rhythm beneath him. Next time, he said, we let someone else volunteer. I'll believe that when I see it. The lights dimmed further. Outside, the shield still orbited silently, bent and blackened, but still holding.